Hi Cloud colleagues, Hank here from CDUSA. Today we're going to talk about setting up ASR to prepare for a disaster recovery test from one Azure region to another Azure region. We already know that there's a lot of video and there's a lot of tech talk and there's a lot of blogs on how to use ASR to replicate machines from on-prem into the cloud. But there's just not anything that we found to be completely accurate and useful for doing ASR replication from a VM in Azure from one region to another. So this video is going to cover all those steps, and we're going to get your application replicating for DR tests in the cloud. So sit back and enjoy. So digging right into it, we have an environment set up. And you can see we've got a recovery services vault here. You can see over here we have multiple resource groups that have been set up. And these resource groups are primarily operating out of East US 2. You can see an example of some machines right here. We have in the resource group DR Recovery RG a recovery services vault called DR Recovery. Within the DR Recovery vault, we have already set up a failed scenario. Let's parse down and have a look at why this node failed to replicate. We go to error details. We can see that we have a warning. Error code: replication could not be configured for the virtual machine. That error points out to the problem, but it doesn't clearly point out to what the root cause is. And to be frank, most errors that occur in replication that we have dealt with are related to communication faults at the IP layer between the source machine and the ASR target for replication. We're going to spend a few moments to talk about what those scenarios are so that you know to avoid duplicating those errors that we had made when we initially set this up. ASR installs the mobility client to virtual machines in Azure using the SSH protocol. Anything on the VM that blocks inbound SSH will result in an installation failure of the ASR mobility client. I have opened up a terminal window on the source VM that we are configuring for this replication example. Within the VM's SSHD config file, you'll note that SSH is only permitted from certain networks. The implicit deny in these rules block SSH from the networks that ASR resources reside on within Azure. We also later found OS firewall filter rules on the VM that were blocking SSH from ASR. Both of these issues had to be corrected in order for the mobility client to successfully install. Microsoft has some excellent documentation for Azure to Azure replication. If we scroll down, you'll see here outbound connectivity for IP address ranges, which are based on the region in Azure where you will place ASR. In our case, these are the IP address settings that will matter to us. Further on down in the document, you'll see a procedure for setting up communication access to both storage and Azure Active Directory. Both of these tasks in the procedure are necessary to complete in order to ensure that replication will occur successfully. Now we're going to proceed to tear down the environment that we set up for this example, and we're going to show you how to actually build the Recovery Services Vault. To begin, within the panel of the resource group where we are going to create the ASR resource, we're going to click on Add. We can simply search with the word recovery, and we're going to select backup and site recovery. And we're going to click on create. You're going to use a naming convention just like a storage account, so no underscores, as an example, are permitted. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this by now. The subscription should be selected. Then select the appropriate resource group where you want this resource to be defined. Finally, be certain to pick the correct region. This should be selected automatically for you, provided that the resource group where you're creating the resource is in fact in the same region where you want the object to be defined. And we can see the deployment is in progress now. The resource has now been created. Let's go to the resource group where it is. You can see we have a Recovery Services Vault now in Central US that has been defined. For the next action, we're going to select Site Recovery Infrastructure. And remember, this video was only discussing Azure to Azure ASR replication. There are plenty of great videos that you can pull up in YouTube that discuss VMware and physical as well as System Center. We're going to start with the network mapping. What the network mapping will do is it will map the networks between the resource groups and the regions for the ASR replication, and this is necessary for all this stuff to work. A thing to be mindful of is that you don't want to have overlapping IP networks between VNets within ASR versus networks that you're replicating from. You can select different subscriptions for the source and the target. And recall our source is in East US 2 and the target is in Central US. We have to select the appropriate source network and target network. And these networks were already defined. Clearly, the Bastion VNet was defined when those resources had been set up some time ago. We defined the VNet DR recovery _ VNet for the client. And this takes a few moments to create. We can see that the network mapping has now completed. It took about 5 minutes. And if I click on it, we can see all of the settings that had been applied. Now for the next step, we're going to be setting up the replication policies. You can see, just as an overview, we've got the settings for replicating Azure virtual machines, for VMware and physical machines, System Center, and Hyper-V. Clearly there are no defined policies, and let's go ahead and call this a default ASR policy. We're going to make this 72 hours because that's what the client wants. That's the number of hours that the snapshots will be retained for. And the client's desire for 72 hours is, you know, things do break and they want to have some time in the event that something breaks to fix it before the snaps completely roll off. And now for the frequency of replication, or this is how often the snapshots will occur. The client wants that to occur 2 times per day. So we're going to set that to 12 hours. You can certainly increase the frequency of snapshots, but there are consequences for that. The most evident consequence, of course, is the amount of storage that will be consumed in the vault and the costs associated with that. So we're defining that policy right now. And the policy has just been created. We can add more policies if we want to. As a reminder, recall the document about networking in Azure to Azure replication. These are the target regions on the left for the site recovery IP address range. For Central US, we have these 2 sets of IP addresses that must be allowed to communicate to the VM. We start at the VM layer since the client has a restriction in their SSHD config file. Here are the IP addresses, but you'll note there are 2 other sets of IP addresses here, and that has to do with, oh, you guessed it, East US 2. So let's return to the portal and focus on the prerequisite setup for the replication. We're stepping into the Bastion resource group where the machine is that we are going to be setting up for replication, which is going to be this computer right here. Stepping down to the network security group. In this training scenario, we have created a rule set within a test NSG that show how to apply the rules for Central US. Your particular situation will vary, and you should consult the document that we referred to earlier about networking in Azure to Azure replication. I'm going to choose the resource group now where the vault is. Selecting the recovery services vault. I personally like to use the dashboard to set up the replication. From within the dashboard, I'll click on replicate. And now we have the source panel. The source is Azure, East US 2, and we are replicating from the Bastion resource group. We can select multiple machines to replicate. In this case, I'm going to select the host where we've got Ansible running for the client. It's important to select the correct target location, which is Central US. We can change the subscription if we want to. We are selecting a resource group, so I'm going to customize under resource group, network storage, and availability. And I'm selecting the target resource group, and you'll note that it picks the correct VNet automatically since there is only one VNet in that resource group. If there were multiple VNets in that resource group, then I would have to pick the correct VNet. Under VM settings, the source is HDD. The destination matches the source type of storage. It is possible to make this different. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you have the choice. Now the cache storage is important, and we're going to select the local storage account to the Bastion resource group. We're not doing availability sets or availability zones. We are doing a single instance. In our summarization view, we have selected Central US. We can see that the target resource group is DR Recovery and DR Recovery VNet. And for the cached storage account, we have selected the Bastion storage account. We can select a different replication policy if we had more than one. I'm now going to create the target resources. I'm going through the validation. The resources are being created. It does say don't close this blade, so we will be mindful of that. Very good. So the resources are created. We are now ready to enable replication. Before enabling replication, I'm going to connect to the virtual machine, and I'm going to just start top. So it's interesting to watch this play out. And I'm going to enable replication. And back to the dashboard, when I click on refresh, you'll see we're still zeros up here, but we have one activity or one job that's in progress. And we can see that we are in the state of preparing for configuration of protection, which is basically installing the mobility client and configuring it on the VM. Our view has changed a little bit. If we parse down here, we can see the virtual machine infrastructure has been defined. If we go to enable replication, we will now see we are in the state of installing the mobility client and preparing the target. All of the prerequisites have been completed successfully. Checking now on the state of replication, we can see we have a new status, which is initial replication is in progress. If we click here, we can get all of the status here. So the prereq is done, the mobility client installed. There is a caution, and we'll talk about that. Replication has been enabled, and the starting of initial replication has been started. Now, regarding the caution message, we are advised that the mobility service has been installed and that a reboot is required to complete the upgrade. This implies that the VM should be rebooted at some point in the future to assure normal operation. It has been at least 10 minutes since we initiated this process, and it's time to check in to see where we stand. Interestingly enough, we have 0 items in progress. And if we scroll down, we can see that one virtual machine has been cached, which means that the image of that machine has written to a container that was created by ASR in the local storage account that we selected earlier during the configuration. The host is now ready to start synchronizing. And the act of synchronizing will involve copying the storage from the cached storage in the container in the local storage account Bastion Diag storage to the ASR recovery vault. We are now at the end game. The machine has successfully replicated using the ASR recovery service. We can now see within the resource group DR Recovery RG that a managed disk has been created that looks exactly the same as the managed disk of our source VM. Thus, we have successfully completed the replication of this machine using the Azure Site Recovery Service from one Azure region to another. I hope you find today's video useful in your in-cloud Azure to Azure ASR replication setup. Soon we'll be coming out with another video to show you how to do an in-cloud disaster recovery test using Azure, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud. So stay tuned and have a great day.